Welcome, folks. This is our third Safe Tooling special interest group in our new series of exploring safe tools. Today we have Jorgen from Comparative Agility with us from Oslo, because that was the closest I could find someone from Comparative Agility to talk to. No, I've known Jorgen for, I don't know, 10 years, maybe more. Some period of time. He's been around the SAFE community for a very long time, and these days he is the one of the founders of Comparative Agility. And given the theme of this meetup, you guessed it, Comparative Agility has the capability to support SAFE. So that's what I've invited Jorgen to come and talk to us about today. And I think without further ado, I'm gonna hand to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Em. Much appreciated. And yeah, I do think back to I mean, it must be like one of those conferences back in like 2009, 2010, something like that. So yeah, it's been a long, long time since we first met, and it's been great to see your journey too and what you've done with Pretty Agile. So this is very excited, and thank you for inviting me. So excited to see so many people here interested in tools and in how to leverage tools to get our work done better and faster and with higher levels of quality. So I'm happy to kind of give you a high-level view of comparative agility. Not going to make this a sort of presentation-heavy type of thing. I think we will go to demo mode and try to talk about the tool itself, how it works, make it practical. I hope that after this, you can be able to use it right away. It's relatively quick in terms of learning curve, so I don't think that'll. But I'm not sure if that was a dog or if that was Karina, but it sounded like someone had a terrible cough. Bless you. So what I wanted to do is to go through the tool and kind of take you through an end-to-end example, because I think that's always useful, and kind of show you how this works, kind of engage you with some of the work as well, so you can kind of see how it works for those people who would be involved in implementing the tool, and then look at the insights that we get out of it and what it means for you as a change leader and as a SAFE enthusiast. So how about I start here by sharing my screen, and then you can tell me if you can see it. That's always that question we ask. Let's see here. I'm just trying to share it now. You tell me,
I
can
can
you
see
see
it.
this? You can see it. Okay,
I can see it. I
wonderful.
don't know
Then
if
we
I
are in
count,
this.
but I can see it.
You count, definitely. Very good. Okay, cool. Well, let me give you the spiel. So here it is, comparative agility. We like to call ourselves the Spotify of continuous improvement. And I know that sounds a little funky. We don't really have any music on our platform, but what we do have is we have what we call capabilities. And those are surveys. That's just kind of our code word for surveys, because they're not just surveys. We think they are a little bit more than that. They unlock capabilities inside the organization. And the reason we think they're kind of special is because of two things. Number one, each of these surveys or capabilities are created by domain experts. So if you look at the names here of the people who have created these surveys, you'll recognize some of these names. If you're an Agile nerd like me, if I say Esther Derby, you will know who that is. If I say Mike Cohn, you will know who that is. If I say Dr. Amy Edmondson, you will know these people. They are experts in their particular domain. So that's one thing that's kind of unique about these surveys. The other thing is that every one of these surveys have been validated by data scientists. So we spend quite a bit of time validating these using psychometrics techniques, which makes sure that these surveys actually measure what they're supposed to measure. And that's one of those things that I didn't realize was such a big deal when I first kind of got into this. I was thinking, what's the big deal? Surveys. I mean, you can go to SurveyMonkey and create a survey in 5 minutes. What's the big deal? Well, yeah, you can create a survey, but you don't actually know whether it's actually measuring something meaningful or it's even measuring what you think you're measuring. So that's why you need a little bit of science to validate that. And there's, well, as it turns out, quite established statistical techniques to do so. So that's why we hired statisticians to help with that part. So these surveys not only are created by domain experts, they're also validated by data scientists. And that's ultimately the whole value proposition of comparative agility. So you see that we grow this platform. I want to say every 3 or 4 months, we add another survey or capability. It does take quite a bit of time. It takes us about 3 to 4 months to get a survey out there, because we not only do we invite these people, it's not just any random person who can have a survey on our platform. We also take time to validate it, so it does take a little bit of time. But this is a safe webinar, so here's, of course, the safe surveys. I just wanted to highlight those. The surveys that you see here are the ones that you have seen on the safe site. These are the official capacities, the safe assessments that they have. Most of this has been developed, with Andy Sales. He's been the main engine behind a lot of these. And together we worked on it to not only create survey designs that are appropriate, but also test them. So a lot of these surveys have been tested quite thoroughly, and I feel pretty good about the way that they've been created. They've been revised a few times, as you may have noticed. But the surveys you will see here on our platform are the same surveys that you will find on the Safe site. So they're available to you, and they are also there as spreadsheets and things like that. But of course, doing this in a platform is a lot easier. So I thought this should be interesting for you, and you can kind of see how you can leverage them. So that's sort of the intro. We don't do anything regarding certifications or training, or at least not paid training. We don't do any requirements in that sense. What we really do is focus on the surveys and the output that comes from the surveys, and then it's up to you as a change leader to take those inputs and then make sense of it and actually make changes, because at the end of the day, that's the whole point of this, to actually make changes. So what I will do now is take you through this step by step to kind of show you how the platform works, how it's set up. I'll probably have you try some things yourself so we can kind of test it together. And then we'll see what the kind of output is and how we can make sense of it. And ultimately, if you have any questions at all, let's go through those and see if we can make sense of this. So if you think about it, there's really three things you do when it comes to these assessments. The first thing you do, at least as it comes to this tool, is that you create a data structure, a way to organize your data when you work with your client. And what you see here is sort of a basic setup. You see there's a core product here with a product strategy team. And here underneath the strategy team, you see there is a LACE and engineering management and leadership. These are people, of course, more at the portfolio level, people at the strategic level, who are kind of looking at the business from a long-term perspective. And then you have a product development operations group. Here's a number of different arts, one in Bangalore, one in Berlin, and one in San Francisco. The way you set this up is completely up to you. It's really quick in terms of how you set this up. It doesn't take a lot of time. So what I will do is I will just show you how you can do it. So wanted to take you through the whole step, but also show you how you do this in real time. So what you can do is you literally go in here and you create a folder. And then when you create that folder, you can create a folder that can be anything you want it to be. So in this case, this is called an art. And let's call this an art in, say, Sydney. Art Sydney. Then we have that. Once you have that set up, what you can do is you can add teams to it. And let me just do Team Avengers. That's probably the most common name we see people use. And that's it. Once you have this created, you're ready to start collecting data. So how do you do that? Well, what you typically will do is you would add your team members to this particular team. And you can say, okay, well, let's just add the team members' emails. I'm going to do this here just to get that going. And then once that's done, you don't have to do this again. It's now recorded against that team. And every time you send out that survey, it'll just be recorded and send it out to the people in that particular team. Now, there are a couple of ways you can do this. And that's when I think it's really interesting for us as practitioners. Once you send out the survey, and let's say we send out the Team and Technical Agility survey, for instance. I'm just going to see if I can find the one that I think is kind of cool. Here, for instance, Team and Technical Agility. We add that capability. We could send the email out if we wanted to. That would be an asynchronous way to do this. There are some benefits to that, right? You send it out to people. You tell them, hey, why don't you get this survey on your backlog, get it done in, say, 3 to 4 days. And after that, we'll review the results. That's a kind of typical way to doing this. It's nice because it's asynchronous. It's great if you're in different time zones. It's also very nice if people just want to do it when they have time. You don't want to rush people. But it's not super interactive. I mean, you get the interactivity afterwards. You don't get it right away. For the most interactive way to do it, you can do facilitator mode. I kind of like this. It takes a little bit more time, But of course, you don't have to do the entire survey at once. So if you do that, let's click on facilitator mode and we'll do this together. Here, you can actually run this as a session. So in this case, let's do team and technical agility together. And we'll just do the first few questions here, which is around agile teams. So when I run this now, and this is an invitation, you don't have to do this if you don't feel like it. What you see now on your screen, there's a QR code. If you don't mind, and I'll do this myself, let's look at our phones and then pull up your phone app and your camera. And if you do that and you highlight that particular QR code, you will see that there is a session that will open on your mobile phone. And that session basically says, hey, please wait for the presenter to start. So I'm the presenter in this case. So I'm the facilitator. And I'm just looking at people saying, hey, let's just do this. And you can see here, there's 5 people who are active getting into the session, which is nice. One thing that I can choose to do now is to hide the results if I want to, or I can show the results right away. You could probably think of the reasons why that might be useful, each of them, right? Like if I hide the results, it means that people can vote and they can explain how they feel. And then afterwards, we can look at what's actually happening. Or if you don't click this button, you will see the results right away. And that can be nice also. But then you have something called anchoring. When you have anchoring, it means that when people see that a lot of people are answering a certain way, other people tend to be influenced by that. So typically, I like to hide this. So I'll click on this now. So I see quite a few people have already logged in and tried to, well, when I say logged in, active session, it's completely confidential and anonymous. So you're not really logging in, you're just actively joining a web socket, which is the technical term for this, but it is completely anonymous. When I start the survey, what happens here? Here's a question. This is from the official survey. Our team is goal oriented. What you'll notice is that every one of these surveys are based on survey items. They're not really questions, and they're assertions. That's really what they are. And I like this because it's kind of hard to misinterpret. I mean, our team is goal-oriented. Well, if we feel that way, let's answer and see what we think. On your mobile phone now, you should see that there's a number of options you have. And once you choose something that you believe is true for your team, just click on next. Now, I can see here what people are answering. So I can see here that, 6 out of 10 have answered so far. In the meantime, we're not showing the results at this point because people are taking their time and we don't want to anchor anyone. So we'll just wait a little bit. Now I can see 8 out of 10. Now, if I feel comfortable showing the results, I can do that now. And then let's see what we get. So the question is, our team is goal-oriented. I have this little tooltip here, which gives a little bit of an idea of why we asked this question. I think it's saying here, this statement highlights the importance of having clear goals that are aligned with the overall organizational objectives. Agile teams should have a shared understanding of the goals they're working towards and strive to achieve them collaboratively. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's the reason why we asked this question. Now let's see what people are answering. Okay, so look at this. We can see that there's quite a bit of distribution here. We can see that quite a few people are agreeing with this. Then there's some that are sort of like, meh, not sure. Yeah, now you see the real results. Some people are changing their minds. But then you also see there's quite a few people that actually don't agree with this at all either. Now, what does this mean? Well, what this means is that there is a source of conversation here. This is an invitation to a conversation with the team to try to understand what's going on. Why don't we feel, for instance, some of us here, quite a few people, let's say 30%, feel that we aren't goal-oriented? Okay, since we know that that's an important part of SAFe, let's have a discussion around that. Doesn't mean you're bad, doesn't mean that the team is dysfunctional, but it means that there might be something here that could be an area of improvement. So that's the whole point of it. I'll show you the next question too, not that we have to go through it. Our team operates in an environment of psychological safety. Super important question. All the questions that have been created in TTA and the other capacities around SAFe, I think are really well formed. So you understand why these are so important. All I wanted to do was to show you how this works in terms of collecting the data. It's not so important, how you do it, whether you do it as a facilitated session, like I showed you here, or whether you send that survey out as a survey where people can handle these questions themselves. Either way, I think the important thing is you have an idea of how the team feels about these really important questions. That's the important part. One more thing I want to show you before we go to the analysis, which is kind of the fun part. You can also do what we call custom capabilities. Custom capabilities is your way of customizing the existing SAFe surveys or any other survey that's on our platform. So let's say, for instance, you're working with a client and you love SAFe, because SAFe is doing some good things. We can see what's been happening. You can see the benefit. And let's say use team and technical agility again. There's 38 questions. You like what's going on. We can take that survey, import that survey with all the questions and with all the data that comes with that survey. So here's the questions. But then you say, you know what? Our client is a little different. We have different nomenclature. We don't like to call ourselves teams. We like to call them squads. Okay, fair enough. We can do that. So we can go in here now and call this squad instead. So that's okay. Our squad is goal-oriented. As you will notice, you still have a link to the world index. So you don't lose anything here in terms of having that world index from all the other people who have taken our survey. And by now, we are by far the largest agility assessment tool in the world. We have more than 40 million data points. So all of that data is still conserved as you're making these changes. Now, the little caveat here is that if you're using this for academic research, this probably wouldn't be valid. If you go to any university and you say, hey, I took a question and I changed one word and it's pretty much the same, they would say, well, no, sorry. I mean, if you're changing anything, that's not academically valid anymore. So for a long time, we had that stance. But what we did is we said, you know what? At the end of the day, we want to be practical. And if our users feel that changing it from team to squad doesn't materially change the nature of the question, that's okay with us. We're not looking at this as an academic exercise. So that's why we made that change. And I think a lot of our customers like that because it's a little bit more of a practical approach to it. Now, this is all good. You can also remove questions. If you don't like some of these, you could say, okay, this is great, but I actually don't really like that statement. I'm going to take that out. You can also add questions. So you have this here and you say, okay, that's fine, but I want to create another one. Our squads play tic-tac-toe. Maybe that's really important for us, right? Okay, let's add that to our questionnaire. Now that's just part of the survey that you send out to people. And this is one thing that I think is super cool. Let's say you love everything that SAFe has done for us and all those validated statements, but you say, you know what? There's some stuff here that I like that has to do with, say, culture. Here's a survey from Dr. Stephanie Pocket, which deals with the Agile Culture Code. Why don't I go in here and talk about, say, transparency, which I think is super important, and bring in this question over here. So now you can take questions from other surveys, from other authors, mix and match, and make this a survey that is perfect for your client. You can create your own questions. You can bring in other questions from other authors. Ultimately, make this a survey that works for you. So I just wanted to show you that too, that you're not constrained by the SAFe surveys alone. You can also mix and match and make this something that works for you and not lose that link to the overall index. Anyway, enough of that. Let's have some fun and actually start to look at what we can do with this as we do this work, as we look at the data. How do we make sense of this? How does this help us inform our strategy as we go from an organization that's kind of waterfall or plan driven to more SAFe? Now, we looked at this earlier. Here's the core product. We have the product strategy team. We have the product development operations team. If you look at the SAFe surveys, I'm not sure how familiar you are with them, but each of them are covering different parts of the framework, and some are focusing on other parts. And it is not appropriate, I don't think, to have the survey taken by the same audience at all levels. There are certain ones of these surveys that are more appropriate at a certain level than others. Like team and technical agility, for instance, really do belong at the team level. But then you have the business agility survey, which I think is a wonderful survey to take because that covers the more strategic levels. So what I want to do now is start off with that because that kind of covers a subset of all the other surveys that we have in SAFe. So let's go to the analysis screen and run a business agility survey. So I have the survey here. I'm going to run this now with the portfolio strategy team. So engineering management, LACE, and leadership. I mean, these are people that should have a pretty good idea of how the organization is doing at the portfolio and the strategic level. So I'm going to run the business agility survey with them. Now, at this case, what you can see here is everything you see on the left-hand side, which is the data that we want to compare, can be compared to anything you see on the right-hand side. So when we look at the portfolio strategy team, I can compare that data to the world index. I can compare it to the elite 8, which is the best 8th percentile of all the teams that we have in our database. You can compare it to an industry-specific benchmark. In this case, it's not too much data. This is a staging environment. You can choose no benchmark at all. You can do a trend report. You can compare it to the last period, which is perfect if you do PI planning, because you want to see how you're doing over time for every single PI. And then you can compare yourself to other parts of your own organization. This is a core product in a portfolio strategy team. Let's say you're doing this in Australia. You can also do this and compare yourself to other parts in, say, other locations if you wanted to do that too. I never want to compare one team to another team. I don't think that's appropriate. But to see an aggregation of teams compared to an aggregation of other teams, I think that is entirely appropriate because it gives an idea of how these groups of teams perceive they're doing. And I think the kind of output that comes out of that can be really useful. So let's run a report and kind of have some fun with this. What I'm doing now is I'm aggregating the data from this leadership team, the portfolio strategy team with engineering management, LACE, and leadership in general, and I'm comparing it to the world index just to kind of get an idea of where we are. And I think that can be really useful when you're engaging with a client right away, for instance. Let's say this is a pre-sales opportunity, for instance. You can go in there and say, hey, this is not going to cost you anything, but let me just run an assessment just to see how the lay of the land is looking. So let's just look at this. I'll call it a business agility assessment. When we run this now, what's going to happen is that we take the data from those teams that we saw, which is the leadership team, and then we see how we're doing. And also, the results are pretty stark. Now, what we're looking at here is, first of all, the difference between two data sets. What we chose on the left-hand side of that previous screen was the data from that leadership team. What's happening now is that the world index, which was the comparison set, is now normalized to 0. And that means that this 0 right here, this horizontal line, that's the world index. This means that every time we're saying we're doing better than the world when it comes to these questions, we're going to be above the line, positive or blue. And every time we're doing worse than the world, at least that's how we perceive it, we're going to be below the line, negative or orange. And we chose these colors because colorblind people tend to not have a problem with these colors. As you can see right away, in most of these dimensions, it seems like we're doing fairly well. At least that's how leadership is perceiving it compared to the world index. But as you can see, in team and technical agility, not so much. I mean, some of the questions here are clearly not looking so great. We build high quality solutions. Ooh, doesn't seem like management feels that way at all. We organize teams of agile teams around solutions. Not so much, at least not how they are being perceived. Now, we can look at this data from a few different perspectives. First, what we're doing here is looking at the differences from the benchmark. That's okay. We can kind of compare ourselves to the world. We can also look at the averages. Now we're looking at the average scores. And even here, we can see that team and technical agility is kind of standing out a little bit. It looks like it's doing quite a bit worse in average scores compared to the rest. Now, you can also look at distributional characteristics, and I think this is really interesting. Let me just hone in on team and technical agility specifically. These are using what we call box plots, which are graphical representations of standard deviations. And you don't have to go back to your statistics class, but the basics of standard deviation is essentially a way for you to show the level of coherence inside the data. It's just a fancy way of saying, do people agree with each other or not? And if they are disagreeing with each other, you're going to see a large vertical bar because it's going to show a large distribution of answers. Everything from like, I totally disagree with this to I totally agree with this. So you have that distribution. And look at this. You know, some of these questions, you see some really long vertical bars. Like here, for instance, not so much on this question here. They tend to be all sort of concentrated around the same answer. But here you could see people are totally disagreeing with each other. And now you can see this from multiple perspectives. You can say, okay, here is how we're doing compared to The rest of the world, slightly better. Here's our average score, which is not so great out of 5. And here is our distributional characteristics. So you can start to see that there's a story being told here behind the data. We're clearly not doing as well as we might have thought we did. We are disagreeing with each other on kind of important parts of agility at the team level. And you can start to see the story start to emerge. So this is a good start because it doesn't tell the whole story, but it takes us to that next step, which is to say, what do we do now? Well, what I think is natural to do now with this type of analysis is to say, why don't we check out team and technical agility in detail and really get actionable? Well, let's do that. So what we can do now is we go back and we say, okay, that was business agility. Let's go to team and technical agility now. We know how our leadership felt about this. Now we can actually go in here and see how the teams are feeling, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who actually do the work. Let's see how they are feeling about the work that they're doing. Yes, there's a perception, but let's see what the reality is on the ground. So what we can do now is we can look at this and say, okay, how about we look at all those teams in all those arts? Now, that's quite a bit of teams here, right? This is quite a bit of work. But for us to get visibility and to start to prioritize our work and understand where we need to focus, we need to have that data. So what we do now is we collect all this data from all those arts. And what we do is, why don't we compare this to the World Index again? But now we're going to look at this and get a little bit deeper and get actionable. So let's look at this and say, we're going to do a operations versus world. And we're doing this, I can't even spell. And we do this using TTA. So let's run that report and see what we get. Now, this is interesting because there's quite a bit of data that's being crunched here, but oh, look at this. First of all, we can see that most of this is underperforming the world. So that's one interesting thing. Now, I'm not going to bore you by going through the same graphs I just did, but let's go a little deeper now and say, okay, now that we know this, why don't we run the impact matrix? The impact matrix is a 2x2 that looks at performance on the x-axis and cohesion on the y-axis. Performance is essentially how they perform according to all those survey items that's in that particular capacity. And then the y-axis is cohesion, which is a slightly more sophisticated way of measuring standard deviation. So what we're looking at here, as you can see, there's a couple of colors involved. If we look at this upper quadrant here, which we call amplify, that means high performance, high cohesion. That means these teams are indicating that they're performing well and they're on the same page. They tend to agree with each other. So these teams, Berlin, Yellow Jackets, and Vikings, and Violent Wanderers, they tend to indicate that they're doing fairly well and they're on the same page on all of these important questions. Now, if we look at these, now, so we call this amplify because we probably want to do more of this. These are teams we call under align. High performance, low cohesion. These are teams that are doing fairly well, but they're not on the same page. They're disagreeing with each other. They may not have the same definition of done. They might not understand what CI means. It might be quite a bit of disconnects inside the team. We need to align them. These are really great information to be aware of because these are leading indicators of poor performance. If teams are not aligned, you know that there's going to be some bad things happening in the future. Better start to align them as coaches. So all of these teams are here. Now, before I go to the red zone, and you can probably imagine what the red zone is, here's the improved quadrant. This is kind of interesting. Low performance, high cohesion. The teams that are in this quadrant, they're not doing so hot, but they know they're not doing so hot. They have low performance, but they have a high level of cohesion. So they're actually agreeing with each other, but they're not doing so great. Typically, these teams, I leave them alone. Like sometimes I might observe them, sometimes I might ask them some questions, but usually they know how to improve themselves. So I don't typically go very heavy when it comes to teams here. But if we go to the red zone, we call this mitigate. Low performance, low cohesion. These are teams that are not doing well and they're not on the same page. They're basically screaming for help. So this is where we need to help them. All of these teams, I think we need to start mitigating them. So, but I said that we're going to get actionable. So why don't we do that? How about I double click on this team here? This is Team Thor. if I double click on this team, what we're going to do now is run a report specifically on that one team that we know is not doing so hot. And we're going to run a report with the same questions, but just on that, whoa, on that team. That was kind of bloody if you're not ready for it. So what you notice now is that when we looked at this as a program or as an art, we saw there were some challenges, but now that we're looking at each team relative to each other, we can now start to see that some of them are suffering more than others. Look at this team here, for instance. They're starting to indicate that in every single indication here, when team and technical agility, they're not doing so hot. I'm going to go a little bit deeper now into the specifics. So what we're doing here is we're looking at the strengths, which are relative in this case. We're looking at where they're doing relatively well. And here are the opportunities where they're not doing so hot. So we can start to see where they have the lowest scores, where they have the largest negative difference, and then also the least amount of agreement inside the team. So we can start to see where those things are. We can also look at the recommendations. And I think these are really helpful because these recommendations have all been vetted by SAFe, and it takes us specifically back to the SAFe Studio. And I think all of you are probably SPCs, so you have access to this. So let me show you this. Here's the question that was asked. We support each other to develop T-shaped skills. Well, here's a recommendation. If you actually score low on this particular question, which is what you did, that's why this appears here, it talks about some of the things you may want to do. It tells you about some of the things you can go to, some resources. And then if you click on this here, it'll take you specifically to the SAFe website where this particular topic is being discussed. In this case, there's a video, and here they talk about pairing. I haven't actually looked at this video, but I know it's vetted. I know it's high quality. That's one of the things I think SAFe does really well. So this is great. Now let's see here. What about we go down here to recommendation 2? Here, for instance, here they talk about what they can do to help maybe with collaboration. Let's click on this here and see what kind of resource they give us now. Now what's going to happen now? We go to the SAFe website. And in this case, we're going to go to, let's see, it looks like we're going to open up Collaborate, which is one of the tools that you get as part of the SAFe Studio platform. So you see what's going on here. We take the survey, we see what the challenges are, and then based on the analysis, we will highlight those questions that tend to have the largest type of impediments for the teams, and then take you through recommendations that are specific to those impediments that they have. So I think that could be really useful. Now, all of these have an author. You can see it says an author label here. That's because the author of the survey are the ones who have created those particular recommendations. Other surveys that we have some of them have been generated by AI. We didn't do that for SAFe because SAFe took that work themselves. And you can also create your own. So if you do your custom survey, for instance, just like I showed you earlier, you can also generate your own recommendations that take you back to your learning management systems, for instance. Let's say you're a large organization and you say, okay, yeah, I like the SAFe recommendations, but I want to add my own. You can also say, hey, we have a really great class that's in our learning management system on our internal wiki. You can go here for more information. That's another thing you can do, which kind of brings it back to all that collateral, all that investment you've made that can then go back there. So I think that's really useful to kind of show you sort of the end-to-end view of kind of where you start from a business agility perspective all the way down to the team and then trying to get actionable. Now, how do you make sense of all of this? I like to use a very simple process for this. And this is where we as coaches can have a lot of latitude. We can do this in a way that makes sense for us. But I like to go kind of old school and not super high tech, which may sound weird coming from a dude who's kind of a co-founder of a tool. But I really don't believe that this is about the tools at all. I think it's about the conversations we have. So this is the sort of pattern I've seen work really well. First, we collect the data. And I showed you that. You create the structure, you send it out. Yeah, you can facilitate it right away, or you can send it asynchronously. Doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, the point is to get the data and to understand what's going on so that everybody has a voice. That's the whole point of the data collection. Now, once you've done that, you find the narrative. And that's what you do when you do that analysis. I didn't go deep into the different types of analysis here, but you saw some of it. You can do a trend report. I'll just give you a quick example of that. Here, for instance, you have a trend report where you can see how you were doing over time. Like here, for instance, you can look at teamwork and all the different questions inside of teamwork. You can look at all of them. You could also roll it up and say, here's the total average for the entire survey, and overlay that with the world index and start to tell the story. Here's where we started before I came aboard. And you could see we were actually underperforming the world index. And over time, we've been able to actually do better than the world in most of these cases. But that doesn't mean we're done. What we're seeing here is that in technical practices, for instance, we're actually below the world index. So that's very typical for any type of transformation. You don't improve in everything at once. So that story is something you can start to tell with the data. That's the point. Find the narrative, find the story behind the data. Now, what do you do with that? Well, that data, that narrative becomes your input to understand the context. And this is where I think the magic happens, because this is where you take that data as an invitation to a conversation with your teams, whether that's an art, whether it's a single team, or maybe even a portfolio. Take this data as a way to start that conversation, because they've now indicated to you where they're struggling. They've indicated to you, given very basic yet very critical questions around the same framework, they've indicated where they have challenges. Now you take that as a way to start a conversation. How you want to do this is up to you. I mean, we try not to say, do it this way or do it that way. We know there's so many ways to facilitate a really productive session. But here's one that I've seen work really well. I kind of combine liberating structures with open space technology. And what I do is I will start off with the what, which is exactly the data that we got. You know, the insights from the data is the what. And we will start with that. So let's say, for instance, we find out that we don't have, let's say we have serious quality issues. You know, we can see that every single sprint we have serious quality issues. Okay, then I do a so what. Okay, given that, what's the impact of having these quality issues? Well, you will hear things like, we are losing market share, or we are losing pride in our work, and we're just not getting to done very, very quickly. You know, there's all sorts of things that the team can indicate. And then we say, okay, now what? Now that we know that this is an issue, what are we going to do about it? Well, you know, you'd be surprised if you ask the team, they have lots of solutions to this, right? They'll tell you, maybe we should start to do an automation test framework, or maybe we should start doing TDD, or maybe we should even have a technical coach be with us for a couple of sprints. There's all sorts of things we can do. The point being that we took the impediment seriously that was indicated from the data, and then had that be part of the conversation with the team so they can be part of that solution. So once we've done that, I always like to go one-on-one, not with everyone, because that can be, you know, that won't be so productive if it's 100 people. You don't want to meet with 100 people and have conversations. That might be too much. But I want to say 15 or 20%, just one group of people randomly, try to do a one-on-one conversation. It doesn't have to be very long. I want to say 15, 20 minutes, and ask at least 2 questions. Ask, what surprised you about the data? You will get some really interesting insights if you ask that question. And the second thing, ask them, what is the data not telling us? There's going to be really interesting information coming out of that question too. So do that in addition to those subjective data points, and then gather objective metrics. This is one thing that I really love about how SAFe is doing Measure and Grow. They do have those flow metrics and they have the outcome metrics. These are metrics that are objective. I mean, thinking of lead time, flow efficiency percentage, MTTR. Those metrics are important, or whatever other metrics your organization is using. I think tying it back to their KPIs is super important, because now we can start to see what the way the business is being run is affected by how we work. So gather those metrics as well, and then take action. Don't do it before you've done this, though. You got to do your homework. But now you get to the point when you can talk to your sponsor and you can say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Leader, this is what I did. I took the world's largest agility assessment tool. I used that with my teams. I found out what the challenges were. I worked with them to find out what they'd like to do. I had conversations individually. I combined this with objective metrics. Here's the 1 or 2 things I'd like to do next. And don't do 20 things, don't do 50 things, do 1 or 2 things, because we want to keep organizational whip very small. And what I ask of you, Mr. or Mrs. Leader, is financial support to do this, and political support, because some of this might be a little bit unnerving. Very rarely would you get a no if you make the case this way, because they can tell you've done your homework. They can tell this is not some sort of pet peeve you want to do. You're basing it on real data from the teams. There are real impediments here to agility and to safe. These are the things you'd like to do next, and you need your support to do it. When you get that okay, when you get that green light, communicate that broadly to all the people who took the 15 minutes to take the survey. Ask them that I need your patience. Thank you for your time in answering the questions. This is what I'm going to do next now, thanks to your input. But I will be transparent with you, and I will tell you also when I fail along the way to show you how I'm going to take that data, take those actions, and make improvements based on what you suggested. And if you do that every 3 months or so, every PI, what you will see happening is that you will create a culture of data-driven continuous improvement. And that's the thing that's so beautiful about this. It's not about changing the world in a day. It's about doing this continuously, a little bit better every single PI. And I like it to be a PI, not a sprint, because some of the changes we're making here are pretty substantial. And you can't make a change in 2 weeks that's going to make that much of a difference. But 3 months, that gives you something. And if you do that continuously and communicate that widely, you will start to affect that culture and make it data-driven. Agile isn't something you become, it's something you become more of. And that's what this is all about. We're trying to be a little bit better today than we were yesterday. And using that data as a way to inform that strategy is the whole point of this. So that's in a nutshell how this works. This is why I like it. I've used it myself in my career, and it works. It's not a panacea. It's not one of those where you can say, okay, I took a survey, I'm Agile now. You got to do the work, but it really helps inform your strategy. And when you do this consistently and over time and in an honest way, which means that you're not going to do everything, but you do those things that matter, you will start to see that people are starting to say, okay, well, you know what? This is different. This is real. And I can be honest, even though I feel uncomfortable exposing how I feel about these questions. Yes, it is confidential, but it's still tricky sometimes to expose this kind of vulnerability. If you do that consistently and over time, you will start to see that data-driven continuous improvement culture emerge. And it's a beautiful thing. To me, it's kind of the essence of agility. So that's what this was about. I know I talked a lot, and you're probably just like, can that guy ever stop? But I will be happy to take some questions. And yeah, I hope this was useful.
That was so comprehensive. Thank you so much. I just enjoyed watching you talk to us about how it works and what it can do. Folks, questions for Jorgen while we have him, while he's still awake. It's what are you up to? Is it almost 5 a.m.?
Yeah, it's a 10 to 5 in the
10 to
morning,
5.
but
Awesome.
it's a great way to start. I'm geeky like this. Usually I will talk about this stuff to my wife and she will like, can we talk about something else? So this is fun for me to talk with people who are my tribe.
Nice.
Oh, I should mention this too. You have, as part of your SPC, you have 5 teams for free, completely free. So, which is a nice benefit, I think. So take advantage of that.
So can I ask one? I might shoot and ask a question. AI. So what's the what are you guys thinking on the AI side in terms of the tool and how you might incorporate it, or is it already there and I just didn't see it?
There is some of it. Let me show some of it here so you can see it. We've been very conservative, and that has a lot to do with our clients because they're conservative when it comes to AI. Here's an example of a survey that does actually have AI information. So what we did is that, some of these questions here, this is around TDD. So he talks about, why TDD is important, some things you can do, and some follow-up questions. That's kind of the example of some of the AI generated stuff. We were very conservative here because there is security concerns. There's also concerns around sharing information and things like that. So the approach we took is that the first generation of the AI generated information has been curated. So everything that we did that was AI generated has gone through a fairly rigorous review process of people that know what this is about. And before we published it, it was curated and sort of approved. So yeah, AI generated, but certainly not real time for those things. The next generation, which what we're working on now, is where we're creating our own models, and they're local in the sense that they're not publicly available on the internet, because that's one thing that a lot of people didn't want. They don't want us to use a classic ChatGPT sort of idea, because all of that information goes online. So we're creating our own versions, sometimes building off a Llama or some other open source model, and training it on the materials that we have, and keeping it inside. We're also understanding and recognizing that that's not easy to do, and it's taking some time, and the processing involved is pretty extensive. So it's not ready yet, but we're getting there. And that kind of information will be a bit more comprehensive than what you saw here. It will be looking at the different surveys that you've taken. We've also give you the option to integrate data from Jira or other tools if you want to do that, and then come up with strategies and suggestions for what you might want to do next based on that information. So that's kind of the roadmap. There's talks about kind of like a virtual coach pilot, so you can kind of say, okay, I want to chat with a virtual coach who now has this information, who has seen the data from the surveys. What would you do if you were my paired virtual coach? We're working on that too, but there's so much. It can't be stupid, you know what I mean? It has to be, you guys are all very well experienced, so we can't have someone who's like, what's a Scrum? It has to be relatively sophisticated. So it takes a lot of time to train them. That's what we found as we're creating our own models.
Yeah, I think for the virtual coach, if you could put that in Melissa's voice or M's voice, that'd be really good.
Nobody wants that. He'll destroy his entire business model in one foul swoop.
Are we going to have like a Scarlett Johansson controversy? Is that what you're inviting here?
You get a competition amongst agile coaches for voiceovers.
I like it. I like
Side
it.
industry, side hustle.
We will talk afterwards, see if I can get your permission.
Oh my goodness, what have you done? I've got a couple of questions in the chat for you. First one is from the demo we saw I guess the interpretation is that the demo you showed us what we could access through Safe Studio. If there's things that we would not be able to access in comparative agility if we're going through Safe Studio, other than the 5-team limit?
No, not really. We don't have any limitations there. We wanted to give you everything. So yeah, except for that limit of the teams. Other than that, all the functionality is available. There's a whole other part that we haven't even talked about, which is the personal improvement module, which is role-based. So let's say you're an RTE, for instance, and you want to say, hey, I want to improve as a RTE. We have a whole role-based module too, which is also included in free. We can maybe do that in a separate session.
Yeah,
but yeah,
absolutely.
that's all included. And that's all free for you as part of that Safe membership.
Awesome. So the second question here was, is this accessible through Safe Studio, which it is, and I know I've once upon a time found the button and clicked it myself, but if I was going to try and find it now, I'm not sure that I'd be able to. Do you know off the top of your head where it is?
Yes. So if you go to I think you have to go on the left-hand side of the Safe Studio. There's something called, I think it talks about safe assessments, or it might be, if one of you have a valid ID that you can log in. I'll be honest with you, my Safe Studio membership expired. That's why I can't show you myself. But if any of you have it being available right now, I can show you where it is. But oh yeah, Jeff Smith. Do you mind, Jeff? If you don't have to do this, but if you're comfortable sharing a screen, I can take you through it. Awesome. This is going to be, this is great. Yeah, perfect. So let's see here now. So it should be under, I think it might be under practice. My safe assessments. And there you go. Then you click on my comparative agility. You have to go a little bit down there. Yeah. And there you go. After that, you will get to, there should be one more page. And this is where you can activate your account. Yeah, that's it. Once you click on that, you see now that you're in comparative agility, and you see that little ID in the URL. That's our way of knowing that you have a valid safe ID, and you'll automatically get those 5 teams. So yeah, thank you for doing that, Jeff. That was really helpful.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the question, Lim. We are now enabled.
Yes, you are enabled. And yeah, it's just one of those things. I mean, it doesn't take away from us as coaches. I think it just empowers us a little bit. And this is one thing that I really liked about this. We are under some pressure now. I think it's fair to say that our business sponsors tend to say, okay, why am I investing in you guys? Data tends to blunt some of that criticism. Once they see that a lot of the work we're doing is data-based and sort of evidence-based, some of the questions go away a bit. And so I think that's one thing we can use to kind of help us a little bit along the way. You probably as a coach know a lot about these things already, but having this data, I think, just kind of empowers you a little bit extra as you make your case.
Yeah. We have a question from James, who likes to talk about all things agile marketing. So you mentioned any investigation needed a certain degree of sophistication. Agile marketing is in its infancy. To what degree of sophistication can that module be used? Are there more agile marketing comparisons in the pipeline?
So you're talking about you noticed the agile marketing assessment there. Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's cool, James. That one it's kind of I mean, I think it's pretty innovative. Are you familiar? I don't know if most of you in the Agile community probably know Maria Matarelli. She is one of those people who have gone pretty deep into Agile marketing and mostly social media type technologies. That's kind of what I would say this falls into. So that's the kind of work. And if you look at the questions, you can see where it is. It goes a lot to how you use digital tools. Because it's about fast feedback loops and how marketing plans can be adjusted much faster than normal.
Cool. Are there different modules though in the pipeline? Is there more coming through from the marketing side? Because it seemed like that was the only one for marketing.
Yeah, you're right. That's the only one we have at the moment. There's another one we're working on, but it's taking a bit because it's pretty extensive. So it might actually be a portfolio of many. But yeah, currently that's the only one that we have available at the moment.
Cool. It's been an excellent session. Thank you very, very much. It's really, really good.
Thank you.
Really
Thank
good.
you so much. You guys have been awesome, and it's been great questions. So it's just great to talk to peers who don't sleep when I talk about this stuff, as opposed to my friends.
Similar at this end of the world.
Geek out.
Okay, very last call for questions, folks. Everyone's got to run to their next meeting, got to hang up, grab a glass of water, and run to the next meeting. That's how it goes. Thank you so much for those who joined us, and thank you again, Jorgen. Really excellent demonstration. I certainly learned a heap about the capability, and yes, let's get you back and learn about some of the other things you've got going on.